All right, let's dive straight in. If you're a game developer, maybe working with Lyra, and you need a quicker way to get your head around its character systems, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, we've been looking at how Lyra structures its characters, kind of the core concepts involved. And our goal today is really to unpack those pieces, figure out what they likely do, and, get a feel for the basic architecture.
Because characters are just so central, aren't they? I mean, player characters, AI, their setup really defines what's possible in the game.
It really does.
So looking at these building blocks gives us a pretty direct insight into how Lyra approaches this.
Absolutely. And the focus seems to be on a specific set of concepts right there in the, let's call it the main character area of the project's thinking.
Yeah.
It helps have that kind of targeted view to get started quickly.
Okay, and right away you see these foundational types mentioned, LyraCharacter and LyraPawn. The fact that both pawn and character concepts exist is, well, it's significant, right?
It is, yeah. In Unreal Engine terms, which Lyra builds on, a pawn is usually your most basic controllable thing. It can be possessed by a player or AI, but it doesn't automatically know how to, walk or fall.
Doesn't have built-in movement logic.
Exactly. Whereas character, that typically inherits from pawn, and it adds all that complex movement stuff straight out of the box.
Yeah.
Handling gravity, walking on slopes, jumping, network prediction for movement.
Ah, okay. So Lyra might use the simpler pawn concept for things that don't need all that foot-based locomotion.
Okay.
Or maybe character is used specifically because it bundles all that movement capability.
Precisely. It offers flexibility. Maybe you have a flying drone or a simple turret pawn might be enough. But for your humanoid soldier, you'd likely start with character.
Makes sense.
What's also really clear is Lyra's heavy reliance on components, building up the character's functionality piece by piece.
You see that straight away with LyraCharacterMovementComponent. I mean, the name's pretty explicit, but this component is where all the nitty-gritty of moving around happens, right?
That's the one. It handles the walking, running, acceleration, braking, interacting with, world geometry, gravity. All that complex stuff lives there. It's a standard engine component, but obviously critical for how a Lyra character actually moves.
Gotcha. And then there's LyraHealthComponent. Seems straightforward enough.
Yeah, pretty standard pattern. This would be your go-to place for managing health points, taking damage, maybe handling healing, death states, tracking max health.
Yeah.
All the survivability logic.
Okay, now this one, LyraHeroComponent, that name is a bit more specific. What does that suggest to you?
Well, it strongly suggests a design pattern where they're separating logic that's unique to hero-type characters. So probably player characters, maybe key NPCs or bosses.
So does that need special handling?
Exactly. Functionality that you wouldn't need on, say, every single cannon fodder enemy. This could be where things like specific UI interactions for the player, maybe unique input processing or other main character features get implemented. It helps keep that complexity separate.
Right, keeps the base character cleaner.
Keeps it cleaner, yeah.
And then for gameplay systems, we see Lyra character with abilities. That points directly to an ability system integration.
Oh, absolutely vital for many games today. Think actions, spells, special moves, skills. This component would likely be the bridge between the character itself and whatever ability system Lyra uses.
So managing which abilities the character has?
Which ones it has, how to trigger them, managing cooldowns, maybe resource costs like mana or stamina, and actually executing the ability logic.
Yeah.
Connects the character to all that cool gameplay stuff.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's also LyraPawnExtensionComponent. Extension. That sounds like a way to tack on extra bits.
It does, yeah. This kind of component often acts as a more generic attachment point, a way to add extra data or maybe small pieces of logic to pawns or characters without needing to create whole new C++ classes every time or modify the core one.
Like a modular slot for adding...
Well, extensions. Exactly. It promotes flexibility and keeps the core classes potentially leaner. It's a key part of enabling a more modular, extensible design. You could hang different bits of state or behavior off this.
And finally, the source material highlights LyraPawn data. What role would that play?
This points very strongly towards a data-driven design philosophy. So instead of coding a character's base health or movement speed directly into its class,
you define it in a separate data file.
Precisely. LyraPawn data would likely be a data asset, like a blueprint data asset or a custom type. You'd create one of these assets in the editor and configure things like maybe the default health value, the base speed, perhaps which mesh to use, or crucially, which set of abilities this type of character should start with.
Ah, so you could potentially create variations of characters like a fast scout versus a heavy trooper just by assigning them different LyraPawn data assets.
That's exactly the power of it. The
Mhm.
components we talked about, like the health component or the movement component, they would probably look at the LyraPawn data assigned to their owner character when they initialize.
And pull their settings from there.
Right. Pull their starting health, their speed parameters, maybe pointers to other assets they need. It makes balancing the game, iterating on designs, creating new enemy types much, much faster because you're often just editing data, not code.
Okay, that paints a pretty clear picture. The original material mentioned a relatively contained set of concepts here, around 16 files or so in that specific directory.
Yeah. Which frames this core character logic nicely. It's not like hundreds of things making up the absolute base.
Yeah.
You've got your foundational pawn and character, then the key behavioral components, movement, health.
Plus the specialization for heroes, the hook for abilities, that extensibility point.
And the crucial data asset, pawn data, tying configuration together. It feels like a well-defined core set for managing character fundamentals.
So recapping quickly, we've got the base types, pawn, character, then components handling key systems like movement, health, specific hero logic, ability integration, and general extensions. And underpinning it all is this pawn data for configuration.
That's a great summary. For you, the game developer, looking at Lyra, seeing these pieces laid out, gives you a really solid roadmap.
Yeah, it tells you where to look for the essential systems. Instead of just randomly searching, okay, movement stuff is likely tied to LyraCharacterMovementComponent. Health is in LyraHealthComponent.
It saves a lot of time just getting oriented, and it really highlights Lyra's architectural choices, using composition heavily with components and embracing that data-driven approach right at the character level.
Understanding these building blocks definitely clarifies things. Makes you start thinking about how they all connect, doesn't it?
It really did. That's the next natural question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How does the information flow? How might that LyraPawn data asset actually influence the runtime behavior of the components attached to a character instance?
Or how does the LyraHeroComponent maybe talk to the Lyra character with abilities? Do abilities change based on whether you're a hero?
Exactly. Seeing this structure is the first step. The next is pondering those interactions and communication patterns Lyra uses between these clearly defined modules. That's definitely something interesting to chew on as you explore the project further.